If you were here last Sunday, you may remember that as Pastor Zach was wrapping up the service, he said, Lord willing, we'll talk about the temple next week. Does anyone remember that? Lord willing, we'll talk about the temple next week. Well, church, it turns out the Lord was not willing. Nor was I. This series, this Divine Desire series, I think it's okay for the church to know this. This Divine Desire series we are doing is so important, and it is so rich and so full, and we are looking at like the story from beginning to end, and each week we kind of look at a specific story, and then we tie it into the grand story, and like you guys, this series is no joke. It is a ton of work. If Pastor Zach looks tired to you ever, don't be worried about him, just maybe like appreciate how much he's putting into this, because it is a lot. And so this week, I did spend a amount of time working towards a message on the temple for you. But as I was doing that, and as we were simultaneously trying to prepare for the AGM, it honestly just didn't seem like it was worth forcing it to come together. Even delivering a message on of that kind of depth on the temple today didn't seem like maybe the best fit. And so we decided to go in a different direction. And we will return. We will return to the temple and the Divine Desire series in kind of mid-March. But today we're going to look at something else. If you might remember, a couple weeks ago, there was that praise and prayer night that the ministerial put on. It was a bunch of the churches gathered together for a night of praise and prayer, and Pastor Zach spoke at that evening. And during his brief message that night, he had us reflect on a question. And because many of you weren't able to be there that night, some of you were, so some of you will have heard some of this before, but lots of you weren't able to be there that night. And with it being our AGM, we thought that it would maybe be good and fitting to revisit some of what Pastor Zach talked about that night, and specifically kind of the question he had us reflect on. His talk began with the question, what did you go out to see? What did you go out to see? This is a question that Jesus asks in the Gospels. We're going to explore this question in our own lives and context in a bit. But first, let's look at the context that Jesus asks this question. Both Matthew and Luke record Jesus asking it after John the Baptist's disciples asked him about John. They asked Jesus about John, and then this is sort of Jesus' response. So we're going to look at Luke's account, chapter 7, verse 24 to 28. After John's messengers left, Jesus began to speak to the crowd about John. What did you go out into the wilderness to see? A reed swayed by the wind? If not, what did you go out to see? A man dressed in fine clothes? No, those who wear expensive clothes and indulge in luxury are in palaces. But what did you go out to see? A prophet? Yes, I tell you, and more than a prophet. This is the one about whom it is written, I will send my messenger ahead of you who will prepare your way before you. I tell you, among those born of women, there is no one greater than John. Yet the one who is least in the kingdom of God is greater than he. Jesus' question, what did you go out to see, wasn't just directed at the crowd that day. It's a question for us too. It's a question for when we gather for worship on Sunday mornings, or when we gather for fellowship opportunities, even when we have midweek meetings or gather for things like annual general meetings. This question, what did you go out to see, forces us to examine our hearts. So I just wanted to take a moment and think about this with me for real. What are you hoping to see this morning? What do we come here to see each week? Do we come here for Christian karaoke? Because there's just obviously no one in town doing it better than us? Do we come to catch up with friends? Do we come to get a free hour of babysitting? Do we come to learn? Do we come to be encouraged? Do we to see me? Do you come to spend time in God's presence? Do you come to find grace for the week ahead? Or maybe for the week that was? Do you come because maybe a spouse or a parent made you come? Maybe you're here for a combination of lots of these things. We want to worship God. We want to learn from Him. We want to be edified in the presence of other Christians. Or maybe you don't really know why you come. You just feel like you're supposed to. And that's okay, because the point isn't to say that everything we do or every reason we come is wrong. But it is an invitation for us to reflect a little bit on our hearts. Why are we here? What did we come here to see? Why do we come regularly? Why do we come not that regularly? I can't answer the question for you. Some of you probably have very excellent answers for what you come for, and maybe some of your answers are still being developed. But I do suspect that some of our reasons for being here, if we're being honest, would reveal that we come here maybe more so to take than we do to give. And thus, Jesus' question is not a light one, as it demands self-reflection. What did we come here to see? To the crowd gathered that day, Jesus asked them to consider if they ventured out to see a reed swayed by the wind, something fragile, easily influenced, perhaps even commonplace. Did they go out to see a man dressed in fine clothes, someone outwardly impressive, more suited for a palace than the wilderness? Or did they seek a prophet, a true messenger of God? Jesus' words teach us that doing the right thing for the wrong reason doesn't make it a right thing. Doing the right thing for the wrong reason doesn't make it a right thing. We must be mindful of our intentions. And so today, it really is important that we ask ourselves, why are we here? Because we know we didn't just gather for a performance, and we didn't really just come for the babysitting, and we don't just come here to see friends. No. We come to church because this is God's idea, not ours. And as we say almost every week around here, we come to worship God on His terms, not our own. Guys, we ultimately come here to glorify God. That is the first and foundational purpose of the church. It is nothing else. It is not all these other things that may be good but are secondary. Primarily, our first reason we come is because God is to be glorified. That's why we're here. And we also come because of this unfathomable grace of being invited into His kingdom. A privilege that even the greatest prophets before Jesus didn't fully experience in the way we get to now. We come so that God is glorified, and we come because God invited us to. And so this brings us to another crucial point in this same narrative. Skipping down a few verses to Luke 7, now verse 31 to 35. We're going to read this in the Message translation. Jesus asks, how can I account for the people of this generation? They're like spoiled children complaining to their parents. We wanted to skip rope, and you were always too tired. We wanted to talk, but you were always too busy. John the Baptizer came fasting, and you called him crazy. The Son of Man came feasting, and you called him a boozer. Opinion polls don't count for much, do they? The proof of the pudding is in the eating. Jesus in this passage really highlights the fickleness of human preferences. It wasn't just about what they saw when they went out into the wilderness, but also what they wanted to see, what they expected to see, what at times they even forced to try to be what they would see. Jesus points to the fickleness of the generation by saying that they rejected John's more stern message and lifestyle, but they also rejected Jesus' more celebratory approach. Some there thought that John was too heavy-handed. Some thought that Jesus was too light. They were never satisfied. They weren't seeing what they wanted or expected to see, and so they weren't satisfied. And this passage then serves as a powerful reminder that our preferences, our desires, our whims should not dictate why we're here on a Sunday morning or even how we ever approach God. Because guess what? the person standing beside you, sitting beside you, has different preferences than you. The person at the front of the room wishes the pastors would do it this way, and the person in the back corner wishes the church would do it that way. I didn't know Zach was going to pick that kind of upbeat praise song this morning, but I guarantee you there was a variety of opinions going on in the room when that song played. Some of us really like the upbeat. Very few, I would say, but some. And a lot of us are like, no, we'd kind of prefer if we just kept things a little more subdued around here. And then just as we were putting on that last song, Ash says to me, he's like, Mom, you're doing 4 songs? Right? So we all kind of know how this should go. We all have an expectation. And then he's like, are you still doing 2 at the end? I was like, yeah, we're still doing 2 at the end. Sorry, Ash. But it was a really good illustration of what we're talking about. But just like the generation Jesus is speaking to, we too, every single one of us, can too easily reject God's messengers and God's invitations and even God's worship simply because they don't fit our preferences or even our current mood. That's crazy, but it's so true. So then it seems worth our time to consider, why is it so important that we worship God on His terms and not our own? And I'm using worship in the broad sense here, not just singing songs. Why is it so important that we do all of what we've discussed this morning on His terms? And it boils down to this. Because He is God, and He is the author and perfecter of our faith. Theologian Michael Wilcox states, worship then is not dictated by those who bring it, but by the one who commissions it and is worthy of its reception. We're going to read that one more time. Worship then is not dictated by those who bring it, but it is dictated by the one who commissions it and is worthy of its reception. If ever a quote should be kind of splashed across church walls, I wonder if this is it. Worship isn't about what we want. It's about what God deserves. Church life isn't about what we want. It's about what God has designed it to be through Jesus Christ. Spiritual formation isn't just about how we like it. It's not just about the pieces of it that we like to do. Because it isn't about us at all. It's about God, and it's about what He wants. Our reason, our why, our worship has to be based on what God wants because we are too fickle. He is the creator. He is the sustainer, the restorer, the redeemer, the one who builds the church in the first place, and the one who has invited us into His kingdom. Our worship should reflect His holiness and majesty, not our own fleeting preferences. Next, we worship God on His terms. And actually, you may notice some pretty repetitive themes happening here, and that is on purpose. We worship God on His terms because it's not about us. It is way too easy to fall into a consumer mindset in church. I think we all know that. We can so easily start to think about what we're getting or not getting out of a Sunday. The music, the message, the feeling, the attention of the pastor or the elder, a friendly handshake or a good program for our kids. We can get so consumed with thinking about those things. What are we getting? What are we not getting? How are we being seen? How are we being overlooked? But what if we shifted our focus? What if we came to church primarily to give? What if our primary purpose was to minister to the Lord? To present ourselves before Him as an offering of worship and adoration? What if we came as living sacrifices, willing to give our time, our energy, our resources, our best? Church, it's not about what we get out of worship. And for the most part, as soon as it becomes about that, it's no longer worship anyway. Worship is always about God and what we give to Him. And that should be our mindset every single time we gather. That should be what we think about as we enter the doors of this place on a Sunday morning, as we come into this room and as we settle into our seats. How can I give God my best this morning? He's so worthy of it. And finally, we worship God on his terms because it aligns with his desires. Worship isn't about our desires, it's about God's desires. And just like worship, God has desires for how his church functions too. It's worth reminding ourselves, as we did at the start, that how and why we do it is his idea. And so we should do it according to his desire for it. If you look at the entire New Testament, Paul's letters are mostly addressing kind of crappy church programming and functioning. He's constantly addressing preference rooted in either past culture or terrible theology and understanding or selfish ambition. And Paul's writing these letters trying to correct it all. In Romans, they don't know how to get along. Paul is writing to correct the disregard for God's preference that Jew and Gentile could worship together, suggesting that they lay aside certain customs and come together as the people of God. In Corinthians, they don't know how to submit. God had an intention and a desire that churches would have shepherds and pastors. And in the letter to the Corinthians, Paul had to address the problem that they don't know how to follow because they're too arrogant. They already think they know everything. In Galatians, God's preference is that grace would be the sustainer, that grace is what would be celebrated and relied upon. But they don't know how to understand and live under grace. They want to make work the primary focus. Their preference is that everyone earn their way into the community and into God's kingdom. Personal preference was a driving force, and it created unnecessary division in all of these churches. In Ephesians, Paul's talking about all these amazing roles of both church and family and how to get along and do mutual submission and build each other up into the body of Christ. He's talking about spiritual gifts. And all of these things are God's intention and his preference. And yet, at the same time, all of these letters are evidences that us people have a tendency to want to make the Christian life, whether worship or church or just spiritual formation in general, cater to our exact desire, our preference, and our mood. Maybe when it comes to the Christian life, you've thought to yourself, I don't really like to sit under the authority of a pastor. Or, no, I don't really want to be accountable to other Christians. No, I don't really want to give my time and my resources. I just want to come and be fed. I just want it to be done the way I think is best. Maybe you've said, I don't really want to have to trust others. I've been burnt before. I've been hurt. Or, no, I don't really want to have to love others because I have enemies. Not everyone is nice or thoughtful or considerate toward me. I'm sure all of us have at one time or another had some of these thoughts. And we find ourselves in a unique kind of disconnect. As followers of Jesus, we readily admit God's supreme importance in our lives. We readily admit God's supreme importance in our lives. Yet we resist adoring and exalting him or living out the Christian life in ways that he has shown us are the way to do it. And most importantly, the way he would desire we do it. Why we come and how we come matters. So what did you come here to see? Perhaps before we close, as we reflect on this question, it would be helpful to remember who we are. Because a message like this can tend to feel a little heavy, a little convicting at times, at least for me. And I think our fickle hearts might need the reminder that all of this is actually very good news. So who are we? Who are we gathered here today? Peter provides a fantastic answer in 1 Peter 2, verses 9 and 10. But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness and into his wonderful light. Once you were not a people, but now you are the people of God. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. Church, this is who we are. This is how we come. This is why we come. We are a people because God has made us a people. We are a priesthood because God has made us a priesthood. We are God's special possession because God wanted a special possession. Why? That we might declare his praises. That we might declare his praises. We've spent the past 6 months talking about God's divine desire. His desire for a family. His desire for you. His desire for me. His desire for us. We see in this word from Peter that because of God's great mercy, we've been taken from darkness into light. We have become his chosen people. We are his special possession. We are a people with a purpose, which is to declare the praise of God. What an invitation. What an opportunity. Church, when we make it all about our preference and our desire and our way, we too often find ourselves disappointed, discouraged, and disillusioned. I think we see this like running rampant in churches right now. When we make it our way, when we insist on our way, we too often find ourselves disappointed, discouraged, and even disillusioned. But when we come here to see God glorified, and we participate in that to the best of our ability, God in his great grace blesses us. We are uplifted. We are renewed. We are encouraged. We are made whole. And I really hope this morning that this challenging question, what did you come here to see, doesn't leave us feeling condemned or ashamed, but rather that we see it as an invitation into proper worship of God. That we see it as a massive reminder that church is God's idea, not ours. And our highest purpose is to glorify him. Our first purpose, our first why, is to glorify God. We can do so through worship. We can do it in our interactions with one another, in our obedience to him, in our submission to those he has called to lead. Every time we gather, we would benefit by asking ourselves, what did we come here to see? And reminding our fickle hearts that we came to see God glorified. Every other desire is secondary at best to that one. And as his people, united in heart and mind to see him glorified, we will be reminded that we are indeed his special possession and his royal priesthood and a light to the nations. So let us, church, make it our mission to always come to see God glorified, laying aside self-interest and preference, looking instead to his desire and his preference and his design, reminding ourselves of the incredible gift of belonging to his kingdom. Do it for God. Do it for one another. And do it for the world who is watching. Because in this way, we will bless the Lord.